Hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge back once again with another installment of a series that I haven't done many videos for, but I do quite enjoy, which is a series of unpopular comics it's okay to like. And today what I want to talk about is one of my favourite comics ever, which is Wanted. Now I was a little bit torn. Is this a little known comic or is it an unpopular comic? And I'm going to view this as being an unpopular comic in that category for a variety of reasons. Firstly, it's by Mark Millar, or Mark Millar, if you want to pronounce it that way. And there's generally a contingent of comics fandom that generally hate Mark Millar. They kind of view him as being sort of a poor man's Garth Ennis, and I will do Garth Ennis videos relatively soon. But he's kind of viewed as just being crude and gross and over-the-top violence just for the sake of it. And some of his comics, yeah, that's absolutely true. Some of his comics are just out for the real cheap win, the really easy, almost teenage, adolescent violence, sexuality sort of thing. Yeah, I get that. But some of his comics, and I don't mean just this, I mean quite a few of his comics, are just absolutely brilliant and underrated as a result, because people sometimes dismiss him out of hand and they forget that he's written a huge body of really, really good work. This is the same person who wrote The Ultimates, which really formed a massive part of the MCU and its DNA. This is someone who wrote Jupiter's Legacy, one of the best superhero TV shows I've ever seen. And he's written a few other things. I'm not going to gush about them here, but Wanted is what I want to talk about. Now, the reason I would say this is unpopular is largely because of the film, which is this. If you remember that film, it came out in 2008. It starred James McAvoy and Angelina Jolie and Morgan Freeman. I'm a big James McAvoy fan. I'm a bit of an Angelina Jolie fan, a bit of a Morgan Freeman fan. That movie itself was absolutely fucking terrible. I did a bit of research before doing this video, and apparently it was viewed as a commercial and critical success, which I'm staggered by for two reasons. One, it was terrible, and two, every single human being who I've ever met who's watched it has told me they thought it was terrible. There hasn't been a sequel to it. And whilst it was made in a budget of something like 80 million, and it grossed something like 400 million, you know, I think the fact there hasn't been a sequel is kind of telling. If you've watched that movie, and I think a lot more people have watched the movie than have read the comic, if you watch the movie, then it's just abysmal. It really is. Now, I watched it recently with my partner a few months ago because I just, for some reason, just banging on about how much I hated it. And as I did that, she was like, well, you know, we should watch it. I want to see how terrible this thing is. So we watched it, and we got about maybe 50 minutes in, and I kind of paused it, and I was like, okay, this is way better than I remember. Like, this is actually loads of fun. And she was looking at me, she was like, yeah, this is actually a really good film. And then I unpaused it, and it hit a certain point, which I'm not going to spoil for anyone that hasn't seen the movie, but it hit a certain point with a certain concept being introduced, where she paused it and she turned to me and she went, what the fuck is going on here? Which is pretty much the point the entire movie went off on absolute cliff and was absolutely just a joke. I'm just going to look through this and just skim through this whilst I chat, actually, rather than leave it as a static image. This is the dust jacket. Let's take this off, have a look under the cover. But yeah, so that's the thing about Wanted, the movie. Commercially, it did well. I am going to speculate that not a small part of that is a lot of scenes of James McAvoy shirtless and a lot of scenes of Angelina Jolie swimming or topless, or implied to be topless, rather. But hey, who knows? And like I say, having watched it after about a decade, I was like, yeah, the first 40-50 minutes is a solid action movie. After that, absolute garbage, one of the worst movies I've ever seen. And I think, to be honest, within the comic book community, as opposed to the exclusively film watching community, I think a lot of people watched it and were like, yeah, this is absolutely terrible, and that's understandable. Now, Wanted, the movie, was based on this particular comic, which is written by Mark Millar, as we just said, with artwork by J.G. Jones. Got a couple of interesting quirks. I'm not going to give any spoilers here. A couple of interesting quirks. To start with, the main character, Wesley, is actually based on the look of, he says, it's actually based on the look of, here we are, Eminem. He's genuinely meant to look like Eminem, and Mark Millar gone on record saying that when he wrote the comic, he always hoped there'd be a live action adaptation with Marshall Mathers. In addition, the femme fatale, or the love interest, for want of a better term, who's this person, the Fox, was designed specifically on the look of Halle Berry. And again, Mark Millar was very clear that he thought it'd be amazing if Halle Berry did. Now, he's got some form for this. Keep in mind that when the Ultimates got written back in the early 2000s, round about the same time, he asked for Nick Fury to look like Samuel Jackson in the hope Samuel Jackson would be cast as Nick Fury. He asked for Tony Stark to be written to look like Robert Downey Jr., etc. So it's kind of like art dictating life. And keep in mind, this comic also came out in 2003, 2004, kind of the heyday of Mark Millar's popularity. And so you can kind of see exactly what he's gone for here. Now, obviously, in the real world, that never would have happened, simply because Hollywood would never cast a mixed race leading couple. That's just not how Hollywood works, for various reasons I'm not going to go into. But what I will say is the artwork is solid throughout. The storyline is solid throughout. And after round about the first issue, it's a 6-issue series. After round about the first issue, which is quite similar to the movie, after that, it dramatically changes. I cannot stress enough how different this comic is to the movie. If you've watched the movie and you thought, yeah, this looks like dog shit, I do not want to read the comic, I don't blame you. Right, I'm so cautious about spoilers here that all I'm going to do actually is just show you the credits. So I'm just going to kind of go through this to give you a bit of a feel. Because the twist and the turns and the genius of this plot, I'm just so worried about spoiling it for anyone who hasn't read it. Sorry, I'll go back a step. If you've watched the movie and you've seen like that and you got halfway in, you thought, oh, it's good, and then you watched the rest of it and you were like, this is the worst thing I've ever seen on the face of humanity, you're not wrong, at least in my opinion. My girlfriend was so depressed at the end of it. She was like, why did they ruin half this movie? If you've watched that, or if you've met people who've watched it, and like me, every single person I know that's watched Wanted is like, oh yeah, I can't remember much about it. And then I mention like what happens in the latter half, and everyone's been like, oh god, yeah, that was dog shit. So if you've watched it, or if you've met anyone who watched it, or if you've heard anything about it, you would not have heard anything positive, other than James McAvoy shirtless, Angelina Jolie wandering around in the swimming pool. Other than that, terrible movie. And I think as a reason, a lot of people, well, because of that reason rather, a lot of people don't rate the comic, and they're not interested in the comic, and they're just like, well, it's garbage, blah blah blah, you know, it's terrible. And of course there's the Mark Millar branding, and I'm aware there's a small but vocal part of comics fandom that hate the fact Mark Millar does stuff like this. So for example, he's got a character called Fuckwit, which of course is an incredibly adolescent thing to call one of your characters, you know? Especially in this case, Fuckwit is kind of like a analogous to Bizarro. So there's no need to be quite so crude. And so I understand why a lot of people are generally a bit antipathic against Mark Millar. But if you take the movie out of the equation, and dear God you should, and if you take the fact that you might not like Mark Millar, you might think that he does sort of meretricious and trite and over-violent stuff just for the sake of it. If you take those two things out of the running and you just read this comic by itself, it's amazing. There is a lot of violence and there is a lot of sex. It is up here with anything you might read about in The Boys. For my money, this is vastly superior to The Boys. This is one of the best comics that I own. I absolutely adore this comic. Artwork is great, story is brilliant, the core idea and the twists and the turns and the dialogue and the everything is just absolutely superlative. And it kind of kills me inside that people just don't rate it. People just don't ever talk about this. Or rather, if it ever comes up, two things come up: how crap the movie is, and that Mark Millar has loads of random swearing and violence and sex. And it's like, yeah, those things are true, but that doesn't have anything to do with the fact that this is a brilliant, brilliant comic. So, do you know what? It's hard to wax lyrical about something where I'm not really allowing myself to talk about it in detail. So what I will say is this. I have this in hardcover because I absolutely adore it. I wish it was available in some kind of absolute edition format because I absolutely adore it. Part of me would want a sequel or more issues in this, but at the same time it's such a wonderfully self-contained and clever story that I'm kind of happy with it just being a one and done. If you're interested in my channel, if you have a vaguely comparable taste to my own, if you ever found any of my recommendations interesting, or even if you've disliked them, if you want to take one thing from me on this, read this. It is a great superhero story. It's up there with one of the greats. Absolutely one of the greats. So, yeah, it's an unpopular comic that it's okay to like, and I absolutely adore it. All right, I'll try and do something sort of similar in this vein next time. I've got a few ideas to talk about some Garth Ennis stuff. But yeah, as I say, Wanted, if you can, please check it out.
All right, thanks for watching, everybody. As always, please like, comment, subscribe. As always, please follow me on Twitter at I am Thomas Judge, where I will post a daily review of whatever comics I've been reading. You can get an idea of what I'm up to on the channel. And as always, please support the channel by heading over to Amazon.com and checking out my prose novel about superheroes. It's a completely original piece of work. The first episode in it is called Arrivals, and the series as a whole is called No Gods or Kings. You can find an excerpt of that on my website, nogodsorkings.com. Until next time, everybody, stay classy.